You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast, where we cover all things scientific related to vertebrate pest management. So glad to have you on board. Hope you're doing well. We are in the midst of a 3-part series on raccoon roundworm. So if you haven't seen the first edition, you might want to just go back to the previous week and pick up part 1 of our 3-part series on raccoon roundworm. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions for new shows, you can definitely reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, we'd love to have you subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and stay tuned for other trainings as we do those basically on a weekly basis. All right. Well, we do have some training material, of course, from our company. You can get a copy of Being Kind to Animal Pests, 2nd edition, where I've revised Steve Meyer's kind of classic work of the same title. And if you're looking to use cage traps humanely or more humanely, this is definitely a book for you. And those of you in more urbanized environments need to be kind of sensitive to this because they're coming after your cages too. So definitely keep that in mind if you're wanting some instruction on how to improve humaneness when it comes to cage traps. All right, well, why don't we get going here let me get the PowerPoint up, and we're going to get into part 2. There we go. All right, like I said before, we have part 1 already in the kitty, so if you want to learn more about the biology of the egg, you can definitely visit my first presentation. Now we're going to move into the worm's distribution and signs, so let's get going with that. So you may say, well, Stephen, hey, I know that you're talking about this as a potential threat to us. Well, but how common is it? Sort of like, yeah, meteors are a threat to us, but what's the likelihood of me being hit by one, right? That's basically the question, and it's a fair question. So what are the odds? And let's have some dice there listed for you here. So this is from the literature. Now, I want to make sure you're clear on that. These are from an article or a publication on raccoon roundworm. So all of the states in green have had a positive case of raccoon roundworm being found in that particular state. You may say, well, I'm in Maine, so we haven't had it here. Understand that not every state has been searching for the presence of raccoon roundworm. And I did not do an aggressive search to see if every state could have been represented. But the reality is does it really have to be representative, right? So you can kind of get the idea that raccoons are pretty mobile. People often move them around as well, deliberately or not deliberately. In our state of Massachusetts, we had raccoons hitching a ride in dump trucks that were coming up from, I believe, from Connecticut, that were dumping trash in northern Massachusetts, because that's where the dump was, and so they were hitching a ride. No, it wasn't deliberate. They weren't deliberately trying to move raccoons, but raccoons obviously can move some pretty significant distances with human assistance, to be sure. Now, we also have raccoon roundworm being found overseas. I've listed a few countries there. So you have Germany, Poland, Denmark. Again, that list is nowhere near complete. They've also found the roundworm, I believe, in Japan, I think in Korea, and I think in China as well. So again, generally speaking, if you have raccoons, you're going to have this roundworm. So just kind of assume that. Now, that doesn't mean every single raccoon has been infected. I'm not suggesting that, but it is pretty common. Okay, so definitely keep that in mind. Now, there's also another indication of what's called seroprevalence, and that is how frequently are people being infected or exposed, maybe infected, strong word, but exposed to this particular roundworm? And the answer is a lot, right? And so you can see this particular chart pointing out that the larger the circle, the more likely you have a positive sample. And that's the red ones. The orange ones tell you the number of people that were sampled. The number in red shows you the number of people exposed. And so a small red dot is one person who's seropositive. That is, when they were doing blood work on them, they found evidence that they were exposed to this particular worm because our body reacts to it, right? So it creates antigens to fight this worm off. And if it's a larger red dot, it's 2 people, right? And then in terms of reported prevalence in the raccoon population, the darker the color, the higher the prevalence of raccoon roundworm is in the raccoon population in that state. All right. So yeah, it's a little complicated, right? You have how many raccoons are positive, how many people were tested, how many people tested positive. Okay. So those are the kind of the 3 levels that you got to think about there. And so you kind of get an idea of looking at it here. And again, this is just a snapshot in time from 2012 to 2015. Those numbers are going to clearly be different because it's 2026 right now, right? In 2027, they're going to be different again. But it gives you a sense that this is out there a lot more than what people realize. So how common is the worm? Again, this is not an exhaustive list of the literature. I just was doing some sampling. I believe there's more articles that I have not included in this, but it gives you an idea of how many, according to various surveys that have been done, how many of these raccoons, what percentages have been infected with this particular or carry this particular worm. Now you may say, Key Largo, none of the raccoons tested positive for the raccoon roundworm. I believe since that study was done, that is no longer the case. Okay, but nevertheless, it's pretty much everywhere. All right. Now, how do the worms harm us? And again, there's 2 different ways when we're infected with these roundworms, or anyone who's infected with them gets harmed. The first way is that the worm eats its way through tissue. Okay, that's why I use a drill. Think of it just goes bzzz, going through our system, right? We talked about the eye last week. The second way that we get harmed by is our body's immune response to the worm. So when the body is trying to fight this off, the inflammation and fighting that particular worm also causes cellular damage to us while we're fighting this off. And this is particularly poignant for small children who get this worm up in their brain. So they not only have a worm, kind of eating its way through brain tissue, but then the body's reaction to it also causes inflammation, which causes additional brain damage to the individual as well. So not good all the way around. So what are some signs of infection? Now, I want you to be careful here, right? None of us are doctors. I'm certainly not a doctor. Don't be careful of self-diagnosis, but I just want to make you aware of what some of the symptoms are so that you can at least be thinking about it, but you've got to be careful because you can go down the rabbit hole and start thinking that, maybe you've got some poison ivy on you and you start, I'm starting to get skin irritations and I did a raccoon job yesterday and am I, infected? This can really, if you have, ADHD and you tend to lock on to certain things, you can really go down the rabbit hole here, right? So keep this in mind, but understand you have skin irritations, nausea, which makes sense because we tend to ingest this particular worm and it's working its way through our body. Eye and brain tissue damage, lethargy, of course, because it's working on our brain. And then, of course, the neurological signs, right? How is it affecting our nervous system and how we're working with our body? So we can lose our eyesight because the worm is eating its way through our eyes. We can have what's called light sensitivity. Back arching, this is when we're starting to get some serious neurological damage because our flexor muscles are stronger than our the muscles that make us put our arm out. Flexion and I forgot the other word when we're pulling something in. Okay, that is, those muscles are weaker. So we tend, when we get into certain levels of very severe neurological damage, we get rigid like this. And so our arms go out. And so you can get our back arching. Loss of coordination, because it's neurological, again, including circling. Now, this isn't so much a human thing that I'm aware of, but also animals sometimes circle. One of the researchers was noting that sometimes what we consider to be a problem with what we think is an animal with rabies is actually sometimes a sign of raccoon roundworm infection. So that some of the cases when we think, oh, that animal's got rabies, of course, you can never identify an animal as rabid by looking at it, but that some of those cases are actually raccoon roundworm infection. And then, of course, some sort of abnormal behavior. So those things occur, of course, in animals, and they also occur in us. Is it possible to have what's called a symptomless infection? And the answer is yes. These are people who didn't think they were infected, but the serological test, again, that's blood work being done, found that they had a presence of infection. And these could be low-level infections, what's called also subclinical, meaning you're infected, but you have no symptoms that you notice that's giving you this infection, or completely hidden forms of infection. So the answer is yes. This is part of the danger of self-diagnosis, to be sure. Bottom line, do not diagnose yourself. Protect yourself. In our next presentation, we're going to go down and talk about how to protect yourself from this particular worm. But awareness, obviously, is the first step to protecting yourself. Being aware that this worm exists, and that you need to be careful when you're dealing with feces of any animal, but particularly feces of raccoons, because they create these large toilets. Do not diagnose yourself. The symptoms can be very vague. This is where the doctor has to do what's called differential diagnosis. And he's got to try to figure it out. And this is what tests can also do if you think that you've been infected by this particular worm. One of the things I've encouraged, if you've been following me along with my presentations for any length of time, I frequently talk about this particular card. This is a medical alert card that you're going to use to tell your doctor that you work with wildlife and that you can be exposed to diseases that the average American or person doesn't get exposed to. So this is something you want to keep with you to remind your doctor that you work with wildlife. So it forces him, when you have certain symptoms, to be thinking about other diseases rather than just saying, oh, you got the flu, oh, you got COVID, oh, you have a cold. When in fact, it could be something else. My cat is bothering me here. All right. Ultimately, I'm Stephen Van Tassel. Thanks for watching. And until next time, take care.
This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast. Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and/or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and/or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.